Welcome to the second episode of the Stray Dog Footy podcast. I'm your friendly Florida Bulldog, Frodo, and I'd like to sincerely thank you for listening. I had thought that the first episode might have just been an unmitigated disaster, but some people actually seem to like it a little bit, so I'm back to give it another try. Today, I'd like to share with you my Bulldog story. People often ask me, why did you choose the Bulldogs? What was it about them that stood out against the other 17 teams of the Australian Football League? Sometimes I like to answer, it's not so much that I chose the Western Bulldogs, it's more like the Bulldogs chose me. The fact is that I'm a bandwagon jumper of the most egregious kind. I make no excuses about that. But to help explain myself and perhaps reclaim some dignity, I will have to give you some backstory. Paint the picture, if you will, of the circumstances surrounding the timing of my entry into AFL fandom. The Western Bulldogs were not always named as such. Though it reads established in 1883 on the Bulldogs logo, it was in fact even earlier, in 1877, that the Footscray Football Club actually formed. There was a short period where the name changed, but it reverted back to the FCC in 1883, thus the timestamp. In 1886, the club joined the Victorian Football Association, or the VFA. A western suburb of Melbourne, Footscray was a predominantly blue-collar community. You have most likely heard the expression of being from the wrong side of the tracks. Well, Footscray was on the wrong side of the river. They had always been seen as a bit rough and rowdy, and never as well-to-do as their more eastern counterparts in the big city. At the time of the footy club's inception, Footscray was a small but rapidly growing industrial community of around 6,000 inhabitants. Many of the club's players at the time were employed by stoneworks or tanneries, leading to such colorful nicknames as the Men from the Land of Boulders, and my personal favorite, the Bone Mill Fellows. But most famously they were known as the Tricolors, as they had added a red cap to their blue and white uniforms. Eventually, the red became a permanent part of the jersey, or Guernsey, as they call it in Australia, and the club has ever since sported the red, white, and blue as their colors. The only team in the league, in fact, with this precious combination. By 1925, the Footscray Football Club had racked up 9 VFA premierships and impressed enough to join the more elite Victorian Football League, or VFL, which would one day be renamed the Australian Football League. They were still called the Tricolors at this time. However, in 1928, before a match against Collingwood, an errant bulldog accidentally ran out with the team onto the field to the delight of the Western Oval spectators. Supporters thought that the name exemplified the team's bulldog spirit, and the club has carried the bulldog nickname ever since. However, the following decades were not kind to the Footscray Bulldogs. They only made it to the VFL Grand Final twice, once in 1954 when they defeated the Melbourne Demons for their one and only championship flag, and once again in 1961 when, despite leading at halftime, the Bulldogs fell to the Hawthorn Hawks. One may wonder how one club out of a mere handful can only make it to the big dance twice in a span of 70 plus years. I mean, even a broken clock is right twice every day. Or as my buddy Craig at A Yank on the Footy podcast put it, even a blind squirrel gets a nut once in a while. Well, much of the club's on-field performance issues would stem from financial hardships. The club was rarely, if ever, out of the red. Time after time, the club was forced to sell off its best players to keep the lights on. Mind you, this was in the days long before salary caps and rookie drafts leveled out the playing field a great deal. And still they came close a few times, losing preliminary finals in 1985 and 1992. However, 1989 was a particularly precipitous season. Footscray's finances were so poor that the VFL tried to force a merger with another club, the Fitzroy Lions, who themselves were also in dire straits. The deal went as far as the VFL Commissioner, Ross Oakley, declaring that he was proud to announce a new force in VFL football, the Fitzroy Bulldogs. But the Footscray faithful were not having it. They were determined to fight for their club to the bitter end. Led by Bulldogs president Peter Gordon and chief executive Dennis Gallimberti, Footscray petitioned the courts to halt the merger. But they needed someone to stand up and be the face and name of the action, and Bulldog superfan Irene Chatfield stepped forward. The court granted the club a few weeks to raise over $1 million needed to pay off the club's debts, or the merger would go ahead. The club held a rally and over 10,000 people attended. It seemed an insurmountable task, but people gave until it hurt. Members literally walked the streets rattling cans collecting change, and they famously sold bumper stickers emblazoned with, "Up yours, Oakley." Donations rolled in from near and far, and in 3 weeks' time, over $1.6 million were raised and the merger was staved off. At the Kennel, the Bulldogs training facility, you can today see the proposed Guernsey of the Fitzroy Bulldogs on display. I think most members consider it an eyesore, but it is a powerful reminder of what almost transpired. Fitzroy did end up merging with another club later on, but that is another story. 1996 was another particularly challenging time for the club, and they finished second from the bottom of the standings, or ladder as it is called. In fact, the only thing that saved them from getting the wooden spoon that year was that Fitzroy was doing even worse than them. The coach resigned a few games into the season, and the club was again facing more financial problems. However, a team of businessmen came in to help, and while doing some restructuring, rebranded the club the Western Bulldogs for the 1997 season, in hopes of garnering more members from all of the western suburbs of Melbourne in addition to Footscray. Now, it wasn't all bad for the Western Bulldogs in the coming years. In 1997, 1998, 2008, 2009, and 2010, they made it all the way to the preliminary finals before being knocked out. Though one could argue that these were all successful seasons, the heartbreak of being so close over and over and not getting into the grand final has got to weigh tremendously on the hearts and minds of players and fans alike. At a certain point, you almost have to believe you are doomed to failure. Some have even called it a curse. 2014 promised to be a fresh start for the Doggies. The old logo had been changed from what was once called RoboDog to the new and current Bulldogs logo. And in my opinion, this is the best looking logo in the league currently. But I digress. Things quickly turned bleak as tensions between the coach and players reached a boiling point. You know things are bad when the team captain demands to be traded. Working a deal with Greater Western Sydney, Bulldogs skipper Ryan Griffin was swapped with former number 1 draft pick Tom Boyd and his $1 million+ a year contract, something that didn't sit well with many supporters. In addition, the coach has resigned. Fast forward to next season. Longtime fan favorite Bulldog Robert Murphy, affectionately known just as Bob, has stepped forward to take over the captaincy to try to pick up the pieces, or right the ship as he puts it. And a relatively unknown new coach has been brought in with the name of Luke Beveridge, who comes to be known simply as Bevo. No one outside the club gives the Bulldogs a chance. A new coach, new captain, and a very inexperienced list of players. But inside the locker room, Coach Bevo is working his magic, and Bob is proving to be just the captain this young squad needs out on the field. To everyone's surprise, the Bulldogs finished 6th on the ladder, making the finals before ultimately being knocked out early on. The Hawthorn Hawks eventually go on to win the grand final, their 3rd in a row. A few months later, on the other side of the world, I am just beginning to really learn about Australian rules football. This has to be the best sport in the world. I am devouring AFL videos on YouTube like candy. I know I will need to eventually pick a team. Brisbane and Gold Coast are early contenders, but I can't decide. Some of the teams I immediately don't like the look of. The stripes of Hawthorn, North, Geelong, and Collingwood are not winning me over. In fact, I distinctly remember thinking that I would look like an employee at Foot Locker if I bought a Magpies jersey. But I kind of decided to wait for my first season of AFL to be over until I would choose a team. At this point, I was more concerned about learning the rules. Finally, March rolls around, and the 2016 season is underway. The first match I watch in its entirety is a Friday night footy game between Sydney and Collingwood. This Buddy guy certainly seemed impressive, but there's only like 2 to 4 games shown in the weekend, even with me upgrading my cable to get more sports channels. I don't remember which round I first saw the Bulldogs play, and all I really remember from it is wondering just how Luke Dollhouse spelled his last name. It surely couldn't be like it sounded. What I didn't know with my spotty coverage of the Bulldogs was that Bob Murphy had a season-ending knee injury in round 3 against Hawthorn, and a new captain had emerged in Easton Wood, and that in almost every game they lost someone else. Hamstrings and knee cartilage and ankle tendons snap with alarming frequency. Mitch Wallace actually breaks both the bones in his own leg, horrifically, by kicking himself in the calf because he is knocked off balance while running and trying to launch a missile. He is done for the year too. Hell, at one point, 7 Bulldogs players were out with the bird flu. But they just keep hanging in there, keep winning just enough to finish 7th on the ladder. Enough for a finals berth, though they are up against the West Coast Eagles in their home, who haven't lost more than 1 match there all season. No one gives the Bulldogs a chance. No one. Not even me. Everything I had heard told me that they were too young, too injured, too far from home in this first round of the finals. What I and the naysayers didn't know was that 8 players would work through their injuries and return to the side in time for the first final. What a difference a bye week can make. But I was now able to see it all unfold as every finals match was broadcast in America, and even I could see something special was happening. The one player who stood out to me was Liam Pickin. Okay, maybe he didn't score more goals than others, nor take the most spectacular marks, but there were some doozies on both accounts, and you would never see anyone else with more guts and determination as he played his footy, diving in with wild abandon. The Bulldogs beat the Eagles. Badly. It was as if someone had forgotten to pay the light bill in Perth. The crowd was so quiet. Except for the Bulldogs players, of course, and the red, white, and blue faithful who had flown all the way across the continent to be there. Such passion. Next weekend was the rematch with the 3-time Premiership champions, Hawthorn, going for their almost inevitable 4th in a row. Again, what chance could these young upstarts really have against the mighty Hawks? But there was no stopping the Bulldogs. Another win away from home, even if just the opposite side of Melbourne's central business district. It started to feel like destiny, like a Hollywood script playing out in front of me. But next week was the preliminary final, and aren't the doggies cursed to never again get to the big one? It was an away game, yet again, courtesy of the low position on the regular season ladder. In fact, no one has ever won a grand final from 7th spot. But that had to come later, if at all. Now it was the GWS Giants, the AFL's baby, a handcrafted expansion team designed in the boardroom to strategically spread the game of footy into the nation's capital, an area which has traditionally been rugby territory. And then there were the ex-Bulldogs players who had been lured away from Melbourne with fat contracts, not just the ex-captain. Indeed, the Giants coach Leon Cameron had been a Bulldog star himself back in the day, and Tom Boyd, now a Bulldog, going against his old club. But it didn't so much look or sound like an away game for the Bulldogs. Thousands of fans had made the trek up to Sydney. I'd say at least half the crowd wore red, white, and blue, and the boos were just as loud each way, whether it was Griffin or Boyd handling the ball. Now, when I tell you this is the best game of footy I've ever seen, you can take that to the bank. In fact, it was recently voted the second best game in the last 50 years. I've seen the game voted number 1, and I still think the 2016 prelim final is the most intense, competitive, hard-hitting, and thrilling game ever to grace an oval. That mark by Easton Wood in the first quarter is as good as you'll ever see. And somehow, when the dust settled at the end of it all, the Bulldogs had edged out the Giants. I can close my eyes and still hear former Bulldog-turned-announcer Luke Darcy scream as the last seconds ticked away, "I've been waiting to say this for as long as I can remember. The Bulldogs goes through to the grand final." And it brings me chills, even now. Everything about the 2016 Granny seems more intense somehow. The colors were brighter, the seats of the MCG alternating sections were blue and red. The roar of the nearly 100,000 strong crowd seemed palpable. Even the Australian national anthem sung that fateful day by Vika and Linda Bull is the best rendition I have ever heard. The match itself was beautiful and tough. It started just after midnight here in Florida, and my buddy Gary had come over to watch the match with me. We had loaded up on Taco Bell for 2 reasons. One, having Tex-Mex was our homage to the Bulldogs, them sporting the Mission logos on their Guernseys and everything. And 2, it was pretty much the only place still open that late. I think I probably enjoyed the grand final more than many of the fans in attendance, honestly. Not being so emotionally invested meant not having my guts twisted by the many momentum swings. Biggs was relentless. Boyd was marking and kicking goals from everywhere, and Pickin was a man possessed. I can still hear committee clear as day yelling, "Pickin from behind! Pickin from behind! What a mark!" And then when he kicked the sealer, with McAvaney screaming, "It's over! It's all over! The drought! The damn wall has busted! It's 62 long years!" Even saying it now, I get emotional. What a story. How could it get any better? Well, I'll tell you how. At the podium, after getting his premiership medal and giving his speech as winning coach, Bevo starts to step away, pauses, pulls the medal up over his head and says, "I'd like to get Bob Murphy up on the stand." The crowd cheers wildly. "This is yours, mate. You deserve it as much as anyone." And he puts the medal around the injured captain's neck. The crowd goes ballistic. Bevo steps to the side and lets the 2 captains, Bob and Woody, raise the cup together. Now, mind you, almost everything I have said so far comes from research and hindsight. I knew virtually nothing about the Bulldogs' history. In fact, literally knew nothing would be more accurate. I had no idea who Bob was, what Bevo had done, what trials the team and supporters had been through, that the club had nearly folded several times. No idea that Dale Morris actually had 3 fractures in his back when he brought down Buddy in that tackle that led to Tom Boyd's incredible goal from the center square to the sounds of "How will it bounce? The stadium holds its breath. It's a goal." And the western suburbs erupt. This I all learned later on as I dove heart first into Bulldog lore. I was so intrigued by Bevo's actions on the podium and the crowd's reaction that I needed to know more. I went back to YouTube, this time typing in Western Bulldogs in the search field instead of AFL. I found a documentary from 1997 detailing the 1996 season called Year of the Dogs. As mentioned earlier, this was a particularly bad season for the Doggies, yet the stars of the film, in addition to all the players of course, were Pat and Jenny Hodgson, 2 of the most loyal fans any team has ever had. From what I understand, they hardly missed even a practice, and I fell in love with them both. I also watched several videos on the '89 Fight Back, as it is called, where I saw Irene Chatfield proudly strut into the courthouse to protest the unfair treatment of her beloved club. And then the rally at the Western Oval and the subsequent fundraising. I'm not sure I have ever loved anything as much as the people of Footscray love their footy club. I fell into this red, white, and blue rabbit hole as a Bulldogs bandwagon jumper and emerged out the other side a Bulldog for life. I'm not sure how you could have scripted a better footy story for me to get wrapped up in, and I don't think there was a better time for me to hear it. That's what I mean by, it's not so much I chose the Bulldogs, it's more like they chose me. When I was able to finally take the trip to Australia a few years later, or make my pilgrimage, as I like to call it, and walk the hallowed grounds of the kennel for myself, it was indeed something of a religious experience. I met many a player, past and present, and made many friends among the Bulldogs family that I still keep in contact with. But a definite high point of my Bulldog story was actually meeting Irene Chatfield and Jenny Hodgson in person, and being able to thank them for what they've done and for what they mean to me. Everyone at the club was so welcoming, and I now truly feel as if it is my club as well. Win, lose, or tie, I'm a Bulldog till I die. A few other notable YouTube videos have emerged as my favorites as well. One is called Western Bulldogs, Our Turn. Another is Into the Fury. And finally, AFL 360, the 2016 Grand Final montage. All of them bring tears to my eyes no matter how often I watch them. I will leave links to all these videos in the show notes should you like to see them for yourself. I highly recommend them. Well, if anyone is still out there listening to me prattle on, I want to sincerely thank you from the bottom of my heart. I hope you have enjoyed this history lesson / love story, and perhaps you would be kind enough to share a link to this podcast with your friends and family, whether they are new to the awesome game of Australian rules football or are longtime supporters of their beloved clubs. Also, I would love to hear your feedback. You can reach me on Facebook and Twitter at Stray Dog Footy, and by email at straydogfooty@yahoo.com. Alright, well, I just wanted to quickly mention that I am not endorsed by or officially affiliated with either the Australian Football League or the Western Bulldogs, beyond being a huge fan and supporter. Likewise, I am not endorsed or affiliated with Peg and the Rejected, but I am a fan of their music. I would like to thank them for the use of their song, Red, White, Black and Blue, which I used a portion of as the intro to this episode. I will also play the entire song for you in just a bit, and leave a link in the show notes to their music. One last thing. Before I go, I wanted to tell you that Bob returned the Premiership medal the next day, but Bevo wouldn't take it back. They decided to donate it to the Bulldogs Museum. It is now on display at the kennel, just a few steps away from the unused Fitzroy Bulldogs Guernsey. Take care, be safe, and go the mighty, mighty Bulldogs.
1, 2, 3, 4. Stare at the sun till we can't see anymore. The yellow belly of executive agent, orange glowing golden arches till the kingpin set in. Black and white binary, berry rainbow reflection. Red, white, black and blue. 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 Rolling gray skies, cold-blooded blue uniform. Pulling down the boulevard in shades of brown and black. Ultraviolence #1 export. Whole nation, population, target devour.